Hey, everybody, this is Ali with the Lead with Meaning podcast. I'm really excited to have Jay with us here today. Jay Abbasi is my guest for today's show. And one of the things that really has always inspired me to start these conversations was to talk to folks that were applying principles that were really important to me, not just in the personal lives, but in the professional lives, and to share that with the community. And one of those things is really mindfulness for me, and awareness and being present. And, Jay Abbasi has, he's somebody that really made a brave move and pivoted from enabling sales teams and, corporate America with the brands of like Tesla and Solar City, to build out your own thing. And now you're really consulting folks like myself on mindfulness and leadership and sales performance. Jay, thank you for being on. It's a pleasure to have you.
Of course, Hadi. Thank you for having me, my friend.
Oh, likewise. So I thought we'd just kick things off, Jay, and I wanted to ask you, what does mindfulness mean to you, and how do you define mindfulness?
Yeah, there's so many definitions, right? And I've heard a variety of them. And I think the way I describe it is focusing on the present moment objectively, with acceptance and without judgment. So I'll say that again. So it's focusing on the present moment objectively, with acceptance and without judgment. Now, I think when people hear that definition, it sounds nice, but what does that actually do for us, right? And so I think if I were to go deeper, in a simple analogy that I always like to give is that whenever there's anything that happens in our lives, there's a stimulus, right? There's a stimulus, there's something outside of us or even inside of us. We have a feeling or we experience a situation. That's the stimulus. And then from there, we respond to the stimulus. So you have the stimulus, and then you have the response. And what mindfulness basically does is creates a space between the two. Wow. So that way you can look objectively at what that stimulus was, look objectively at what your initial reaction is, and then choose how you wish to relate to it. And then from there, you'll have a little bit more of a way to manage your emotions and manage the situation in a way that's most effective or best serves you and those around you.
Wow. And as a consultant in several spaces for yourself, obviously a lot of that journey probably started personally, but, you're guiding people today in a professional space on not just mindfulness, but sales performance, and, avoiding burnout and things of that nature. So you've seen a direct impact, not just personally, but professionally, in applying mindfulness practices in the corporate world. Would that be fair?
Yeah. I mean, anyone who's worked at Tesla, and I have so many good friends who are still there, I like to describe it as it was like riding a roller coaster with twists, turns, and flips and craziness. And then you get off that roller coaster and you look at it, you're like, was I on that thing for that long? And so what I observed in working there, first I'll say what I observed in others is complete burnout, working towards the mission, and people were really suffering. And it was sad. It broke my heart to observe this. And I went down those spirals as well at times, but I had my practice for a few years when I was getting to the height of my roles at Tesla. So I was able to detach a little bit. So my personal experience has helped me to, look, I'm not going to say that you don't feel stress. I think that's a lie to say that mindfulness will get you to a place where you don't ever feel bad or you don't feel stressed out. That's just not true. Instead, what it helps is it doesn't linger. You don't hold on to it. You don't cling to it as much. You're able to release and let go of that stress. So that's what my personal experience has been. And those that I've had the opportunity to speak with and to share some of my experiences and help guide them to adapt to apply, I should say, mindfulness to their lives, have had similar results. They've shared that this is what it kind of removes you from the situation a bit, so you can enjoy your family, enjoy time away, and not feel like you're at the mercy of your emotions in your day-to-day life at work.
Wow. No, and it's so true, and similar to some of the things I've experienced. I think you and I have shared previously, when we look at personal development, I think more trending today, as we'll call it, is the practice of meditation and mindfulness and, some catchphrases. But, maybe 20 years ago, it wasn't so prevalent, in mainstream, especially corporate America. So you had shared a story with me, Jay, that I don't know if you'd be comfortable sharing about personal development. I think early on, we're all trying to find that balance of how can we be successful in, our endeavors. And we start to listen to the Tony Robbins and the Gary V's of the world, and, try to look at kind of that growth trajectory of, how do we attain these Jim Rohn goals. And then there's that balance of kind of inward work as well, whether that's any type of inward work, whether it's meditation, mindfulness, Buddhism, and we all, start to look inward in ourselves and say, are we being our best self? And you had that pivot point, I believe you're on a plane, where you asked yourself this question, and it created this aha moment for you where, maybe you could share that.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you're asking me to share this, because truth is, I've only shared it to a few people. Ali, this is the truth. I think I've shared it with you and maybe like 2 or 3 other people in my life, but I don't have any problem sharing it, because you asked me, I'm open to sharing it, and whoever watches it, I hope they find value in it. So the story is, I was very much like you were saying, I've always been a personal development guy. Well, not always. Let me rephrase. Probably since 6-7 years ago, I got into it. And so it feels like it's always been that way, but it's been that way for about 6-7 years, reading all these books, Awaken the Giant Within, those kind of things. And I'm on a plane, and the night before, I had watched I Am Not Your Guru on Netflix.
I love that movie.
It's great, right? And I was so inspired, and I was so driven to succeed, and I felt this motivation. And I'm on this plane, and I have that sense, and I have that in the back of my mind. But as I'm on the plane, I'm listening to Ram Dass. So Ram Dass audiobook was Here and Now. His very famous book, Here and Now. And I'm listening to Ram Dass speak, and I'm like, he's telling me to be empty. And I'm like, wait a minute, how am I supposed to be empty, to let go, when I have this other voice in my head telling me to go after things? It didn't make sense to me. And I remember I had the audiobook, and I just took the headphones out and I started to journal. And I started to journal because I'm trying to understand this. And I'm writing out this paradox that it didn't make sense. How could I be successful and driven and achieve material things in the world, which, I want for my family and things, but how can I also let go and not get attached to any of these results? And it brought me to this realization that the person I think I am, this identity of Jay, is in itself an illusion, right? It's not who I truly am. There's something deeper to me, to this I, that I realized in that moment. It was like becoming the observer or the watcher, in a way, people say. It's a realization or an actualization. And it happened suddenly. And I realized that the tool of Jay Abbasi is itself a tool. It's something that will bring value to the world, but it's not who I truly am. So I put the pen down and I looked up, and it felt like everything was different. I looked around and people looked different. Things sounded different. It's almost like I stepped into another dimension. It sounds so funny talking about this. I feel really, not silly, but it's interesting now that I'm thinking about it in my memory. But when I experienced it, this is what it was like. And even when I talked to people, it felt different. I felt like I was riding this wave of awareness that I hadn't ever experienced before. And it stayed with me for maybe like a day and a half, and then it started to dissipate. And I've had glimpses of it since. I haven't had as strong of an experience, but it's very similar to the awakening experience you hear others share when they've been able to let go of the self.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing it. The reason I was hoping that you'd be open to sharing that story today was because I think so many of us, we're striving for that aha moment in our lives, and and it can be a flow state. It could be a moment of awareness or awakening, but it's that crossroads when we're really, able to slow things down and look inward and make conscious decisions with how we view the world. I've shared this in the past, by the time we are, 35 years old, 95% of who we are is hardwired into our subconscious programming. So that perspective we have of ourselves, I often ask my wife, whose perspective is that? So to really try to ask ourselves to go deeper and say, who's really seeing things, right? And I think we have to, like a muscle, invest in the time we give ourselves to journal, to meditate, to separate, to be the watcher. And there's so many different tools and techniques we use, but to be able to not allow the story we're telling ourselves to be somebody else's story, if that makes any sense. um, and I know for one of the things that also interested me about you is a big part of that journey you had to go inward was through some tragedy, right? And I think for me, through our greatest failures, we kind of learn, how we can embark on our greatest successes, and so for me, I was, I would say one of the greatest blessings I was given in my life, and it might sound strange, was I experienced a lot of death in my life. And it wasn't this morbid thing. I was brought up in the United States, but before I was 20, I'd been to 20 funerals. And it really changed my perspective on the value of kind of the relationships I had in my life and who I had in my life, right? And I know that you had shared a story that, you went through this real crossroads after a passing. And it really allowed you to almost, be reborn in a lot of ways with your principles and your beliefs, right? And I don't know if I want to necessarily have you share kind of what the story was. And, if you want to, that's great. But really a matter of how can us as individuals, take struggles or challenges as lessons, as stepping stones for us to really embark on a layer of growth.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. 20 funerals before the age of 20. Wow.
Yeah.
For me, it was my father passing away, and that was in 2014, and it was sudden. He didn't have a sickness. He wasn't in the hospital for, with a disease or something. It was a sudden heart attack. And it led me, as you said, to want to first figure out how to manage the grief, how to manage the situation. And there were a lot of things that were accumulating in my life. I mean, the tragedy of losing a parent is hard in itself, but I was also struggling with my marriage at the time, and financially I wasn't doing so great. So I looked at everything I could to find a way to bounce back and to understand myself, and to not, it almost felt like for much of my life, this was a realization for me that I was on autopilot for much of it. That I was living the way you kind of described it, somebody else's life, what someone else thinks that I should be doing. And I kind of got fed up. I got fed up with that. And I said, I'm going to look at a way in which I can create and manifest the life that I want. And that was it led me to read much about different books, and it led me to mindfulness and to start practicing. And from there, I've developed the practice, and I feel like who I am today would not be who I am today had I not experienced that tragedy back in 2014. And I heard this said recently, and it really stuck with me, which is, while pleasurable experiences are great, and we remember them, and they are a good experience of life, no one grows from a pleasurable experience. No one develops during pleasurable experiences. There's nothing really learned. They're just experienced, right? Doesn't mean it's bad, but it's the painful experiences, the struggles, the hardship. That's what we learn from. That's what we grow from. That's where we develop into the person that we become. So what I would say to anybody is, when you're going through a hard time, of course it's hard. It's not like you resist it and you deny it, but maybe zoom out a bit and realize that there's something to be learned here. There's something that you will look back at that moment and that experience and say, hey, I am who I am today because I went through that. I grew from that. And there's something that has shaped me into the person I have become.
Yeah, no, and I think it's so true. And I think and thank you for sharing that, because, I lost my father about 8 years ago as well. And it was actually one of the things my grandma said, growing up, I'm a first generation American, so I'm the only son of 3 siblings, where, my father came in the late 60s, and so to speak. And so, like most, you're trying to fit in, you're trying to find your way. And I remember it was when my nana, was passing. And I've shared this story similar to yours privately, but probably never publicly. And upon her passing in her native tongue, she's had open heart surgery, and she had, long battles with kind of fighting for her health. And we knew she was going to pass. I was at college at the time, and they'd call me down saying, it's not looking good. She could probably come by and say your goodbyes. And we had this evening just with her and I, and to the point where she still had a drape. She was still open. So and she was squeezing my hand, speaking to me in Urdu, our native tongue. I said, do you believe in heaven and hell? And I said, yeah, well, of course I do, Nana. And she said, will will you mourn for me? And I said, of course I will, right? And then she says, if you mourn me, I won't look after you. And it kind of blew my mind that she would say something like that, right? And she says, if you truly want to mourn me, live each day as if with every lesson that I taught you. And at
Yeah.
the end of the day, you can't lie to yourself when God's looking at you through your own eyes. And that was so impactful. And regardless of what your religious denomination is, if you believe in God or if you don't, what I took from that was I can't lie to myself when I'm seeing myself, not realizing it was a watcher technique or whatever it is. And probably for a year, at the end of the day, it was a part of my meditation or mindfulness at the end of the day, where for 5 minutes I would look in my own eyes, right? And I would try to catch anything that was lingering from that day, right? But through that tragedy, I learned to like truly be grateful for the relationships I had in my life and to be mindful of how I was speaking to others. Now, we're still human, we're not perfect, things of that nature. But the reason I thought it would be important to share that is, especially today, we're living in a pandemic world, mental health, and it's really hard to not allow these outside influences to impact us in a negative way. So I think mindfulness and meditation and awareness and journaling are great tools that we can all apply right now, but especially to applying later. How did that impact you? Not just kind of going through that process, but as a man, as a father, as a as a son, how did you become better, being more mindful through that tragedy? And have you been able to be a better consultant now in applying those tips, and techniques to your professional life as well?
Yeah, on a personal level, you don't have, when you're the only son, I'm the only son, right?
Likewise.
Yeah, I'm the only son, and I have two sisters. My daughter was 2 at the time. There isn't an opportunity to still be a kid at that point. I think it was like a moment. In that moment, I had to like just grow up, right? I had to grow. I didn't have a choice. When you look around and you see your mother grieving and your sisters just in terrible shape, right? And your 2-year-old daughter is there. She doesn't understand what's going on. At that point, you have to recognize that you have to be the strength for them. And that's what I experienced. I just felt I had to be the strength. I had to be the rock. And that was hard. I still found time to let out my emotions. I would never suggest, suppressing and trying to be like everything's okay. But it taught me how to be strong in the face of adversity, how to be the person who, when the storm comes, to be able to be resilient and push through it. And I did it more for the sake of them, because they needed it. They really needed it. And I think that when you experience something like that, it stays with you. It really does. Now, I'd say that experience plus the practice of mindfulness has helped me professionally as well, to deal with uncertainty, which we dealt with a lot at Tesla. So much uncertainty, and there's still, still a company that is so fast paced that whatever the challenge was, whatever came, I was able to just be okay. I was able to manage through it because I had experienced loss. I had experienced hardship at a personal level, and I didn't run from it. That's the difference. We all experience hardship. The question is, did you run from it, or did you embrace it and learn from it, right? In other words, I hate to say see it as an opportunity. That's not what I mean. But had you had the perspective, I'm going to deal with this directly, then that was an opportunity for growth for you that you took on either consciously or unconsciously that led you to your growth. And so for me, professionally, dealing with, the challenges at Tesla, starting a business, not having any idea how this is going to work out, going through the ups and downs and all that uncertainty, I've been able to let go of it a little bit and just say, I have to just focus on what I'm doing right now in the present moment. And if I can stay focused on that, I can then be able to look up and measure my progress little by little, but I could stay focused on the present moment and not let the distractions of life pull me away from what I find to be most important right now.
Yeah. No, I think it's so important to recognize these challenges and embrace them, whether we face them immediately or not, for several reasons, right? Because I'm a big fan of, the Stoic philosophies, and they talk a lot about, the obstacle is the way. And one of the things I heard, completely off topic, he's called the bodybuilding yogi, Ben Pawlowski. He did an interview on impact theory, which I love. And he says, if there's something that challenges him, his philosophy is you must do it, which aligns very well. And we often say the things that we fear the most are the thing that we need the most, right? So I do view them as lessons and opportunities. I wouldn't endorse that for everybody. I think for me, that's work for me to, I think as we have these conversations, every one of these things isn't going to work for you. The important thing is to take these different tools and say, what does work for me, and learn from it, right? So I kind of walk the philosophy of, I've signed up for certain lessons that I'm supposed to learn in this existence, in this avatar, in this life that I have. And I will face those lessons until I master them. And even once I master them, they'll come back in a different form to make sure I master them. It's something that I believe myself personally, but it's been validated by different readings and philosophers that have passed that message along as well, right? So, and that's how I kind of form my own opinions. I have an opinion, and then I go out and try to be a seeker of truth in different modalities. And then if I feel enough similarities, I say, this works for me, right? And so, and there is a science to facing your fears, as you mentioned, right? Now, one thing that I've suffered in my life is burnout, where I was, really focusing on work. And what I did was I stopped investing in me, and things became habitual. I was still working out and meditating and journaling and reading, but it was more to check a box, right? And I realized it was quantity, not quality, and kind of really had to slow down. And I hit this pivot point where I was in bad shape. Just, I wasn't working out and so on and so forth. I won't bore the stories. But balance is really important to me today. It's a reason why I have sacred time with my family. I don't grab my phone for 2 hours at night. I don't post on LinkedIn on the weekend. Not that I'm some big, have a big following, but it's just certain rules I've made for myself today to try to maintain balance, right? I know balance is really important to you. How do you personally and professionally, guide, folks within corporate America to have that level of balance, but still strive for a level of peak performance?
Yeah, I think some of the examples that you just gave, Adi, are fantastic examples. Setting rules for yourself. And it really comes down to what you're consuming, right? And so on, what's coming to you in the form of consumption, and then what are you doing for self-care, right? And so for the self-care aspect, it's fascinating when I hear of people say, I don't have the time to do X, Y, and Z. That would be under the category of self-care and mental care, mental well-being, because there is only one tool that we use to experience the world. And it's right here. Yeah. There's nothing else we use, right? So for us to give time towards other things that have nothing to do, right, with strengthening the tool and ensuring that it is operating effectively. If we don't even have 5 minutes in a day to do that, our priorities are messed up, man, right? And so, to me, that's, I know it's more like a philosophical thing, but it's just so critical for me to share with people. And I share that with as many people as I can. There's nothing more important than this. And if you can't give 5 minutes, there's something else we have to have a conversation about. So how I do it is, I'll share with you, and then some of the things I advise. So when it comes down to self-care, I very much have a routine every morning, the way you kind of described, that I give myself. And that includes, of course, a meditation, journaling, stretching, those kind of things I do regularly as a way to give myself some time. But I also incorporate something in the middle of the day normally to give to me, which includes maybe a walk out in nature, something like that, to give myself a break in the middle of the day, because otherwise it's just morning to night, just running like crazy. So I give myself a break in the middle. If I can't get out because it's raining, I'll just make a real effort to eat mindfully or to do something mindfully throughout my day. And then, of course, that sacred time with family. My daughter's 8, so we're normally watching Despicable Me over and over and over and over again. I basically have the movie memorized, but I give her that time.
That's her time, yeah.
Right. But one thing I advise people to do that I've inherited personally is to be very careful of what notifications that you have on this thing. And I don't ever tell people what to do. You kind of alluded to that before. That's not my job. I'm just going to give you a few options and then you tell you what to do. You know you better than I know you. So I would advise to be very mindful of what notifications you have. Personally, my notifications are only, well, first, my phone is always silent. 100% of the time. It never rings and it never vibrates. Because that is a distraction from me in the present moment that I won't. I love people. I love, Ali, you're a great dude, man. But if you call me, I might not answer. I'll call you back during a time that's set for me, right? And so that's one thing. And then I have only text messages and phone calls that appear as the little button, the icon.
As a missed call, yeah.
Right. And Outlook, because I have to have my calendar somewhere there. But anything else, any other emails, LinkedIn, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, any other social media, any other apps, no notifications come to my phone. I instead have time set for those things. I have time to check my email. I have time to go through LinkedIn. And so I would advise and encourage people in the professional world through, in speaking with organizations to have a plan for this. Make your plan according to you to where you have time set for when you would go through these things versus them telling you when you need to do them. Because if you allow for that, this device ends up controlling you rather than you controlling the device.
Wow. No, and I 100% agree. I have this debate with people that I love very dear and close to me on a regular basis about the energy that we give away for free, right? Yeah. So I'm very conscious of the energy that I want to consume. I had a reality check the first 2 weeks of this pandemic where I got myself in a groove of checking a daily news feed and checking a daily, health impact. And I realized this isn't serving me as much as I want to get into the truth behind the truth of things. And even now I ask, my missus to send me emails of things so I could dump them into a folder of junk and I can consume them aimlessly when I want to. So, and I think this is why a lot of us, especially in corporate America, aren't aware of the danger of the phone the last hour and the first hour of the day. There's a lot of science and data behind this where your brain is not ready to consume that type of information. If you're just feeding your emails immediately after you get up, it's not going to benefit your day. And I like to do the same thing where if it's on my calendar, I don't have notifications on my phone, for anything. It's not going to beep, so, and then I schedule my email time and things of that nature as well. But it's important as we talk about being present, right? And I always try to tie my Eastern, kind of obsessions to the Western world. And more recently, The Last Dance just finished on, ESPN, where everybody's watching our childhoods of, the Michael Jordan era. And a lot of people don't recognize the impact that Zen philosophy and Phil Jackson had on Michael Jordan. And so I usually like to always correlate these philosophies. As you mentioned, how do you not have 5 minutes for what the greatest basketball player of all time, and even Kobe and everyone else, rest in peace, have applied to their lives, which is a mindfulness, a meditation, a breathwork practice, right? So how do you define the importance of being present, which I know you just touched on, and how do you encourage, corporate America that is completely foreign to some of this, and saying, this is how we can apply that power of presence and flow state in that board meeting to really make a difference, with your teams to really encourage them. Like, what have you seen firsthand, and, what would you share?
Yeah, I think I haven't watched The Last Dance, by the way. I hear it's good. I gotta check it out. Yeah,
if you're a Jordan fan, it's great.
Yeah, I am. Well, to some extent, I have my opinions. Michael Jordan, I think I'll say it quickly. So I think he is incredible in terms of what he's accomplished and the amount of accolades, and his game, right, is unbelievable. I do think there is an aspect, though, that I worry, where I don't want to use the word worry, but I have some concern that people, kids may look at that and see that kind of bullying aspect and that kind of fire and competitive nature as the path to success. And I don't think that's the truth.
Mhm.
And I think it's one way. Sure, it worked for him. But I would also say he seems to have a lot of anger in him that he uses to drive his behavior. So there's that aspect of it that does come to mind when I think about him. But anyway.
It reminds me of a Trent Dilfer statement, who's, obviously won a Super Bowl at the Ravens, but he's more known as kind of a quarterback coach or, guru. And he said, it's about squeezing the sponge, not ripping it, when you try to get the most out of people. So to your point, like, there is a way to, get the most out of people in a way that might not might deem the greatest results, but there might be some pause with the methodology of things. So I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. It's a way. It doesn't mean it's the way.
The way, yeah.
So you asked me how the importance of the present moment. So I think when it comes to organizations, I do, of course, share some data that's pretty valuable. And there first has to be an understanding, which is stress in itself and any negative emotion, or what results in burnout, right, is when our minds are thinking about the past or ruminating about the future. It's not even something that's theory. It's just practical. It just makes sense. You don't stress about the present moment. You can't. You physically cannot. If you're in the present moment and you're experiencing the present moment, then you're not stressed about anything that's going to happen soon or something that already happened. Those two things cannot exist.
You
right?
can't be in a fight or flight and a powerful state at the same time.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. You're in one or the other.
Yeah.
So I think there's understanding that's required. And I have quite a bit of this in my online course that's coming. Like, understanding this concept is important, because once a person understands this, we can then get to the next step, which is, okay, now that I get that, okay, stress happens when I'm in the past or when I'm in the future. And the data is incredible. Over 80% of people in the United States say that they are stressed from their work. Over 85% say that they are disengaged at work. So these are big numbers. And the dollar amounts that go into mental health needs, which is people taking time off of work, people seeking help and going to doctors, it's over $190 billion over the last year, just in mental health needs for organizations. So there's a dollar amount that's associated. We also know, just practically, that if we want to accomplish anything, we do so in the present moment. We get inside of a flow state, and there's a lot of research that is done on flow state. And when we are able to focus our attention on what we're doing and not be distracted, we get better results. We create new things. We innovate, right? So all of those things are aspects to why organizations could find value in implementing a mindfulness program, so they could help their employees be more present. And while all that is data, and that's nice and it's helpful, I would say personally, my reason for wanting people to be in the present moment is because you suffer less. You are happier. And that's what I want for people. I want people to be happier. I want people to enjoy their lives, because here's the truth. When have you ever experienced life where it wasn't in the present moment? When did that happen? Because in recorded history, it's never happened where somebody experienced life where it wasn't in the present moment. So if you aren't experiencing life in the present moment, what are you doing? You're not experiencing life. You're off somewhere. You're distracted. And other studies showed that over roughly about half the time, our minds are wandering. 47%, Harvard study said 47% of the time our minds are wandering. This is 20,000 data points. It was or 200,000 data points, a significant study. And it also showed that there's a correlation between being distracted and being unhappy. It was very significant that they were able to make that correlation. So we know you're unhappy when you're not in the present moment. So what I hope that people will understand as to why the present moment is so valuable for them is every moment you've ever experienced joy. Any great moment that you could think back to, the birth of a child, a huge accomplishment, something where you weren't even thinking about you anymore. You were just experiencing something and it was wonderful. It was miraculous. It was in the present moment. So while I'm not saying that we want you to get to a place of some altruistic, fluffy rainbow world that doesn't exist, what I do want to say is you will have a more fulfilling life. You will experience life better by being able to be in the present moment more often than not.
So true. I always like to say, I want to live my life in slow motion, because you're right on the money, Jay, because if we can, live our lives in gratitude, and I've talked about this ton and ton, is that giddy relationship, that child, that euphoria that you're speaking of. When we talk about kind of that subconscious scale, you're only in the middle. And when you're truly trying to attain that enlightenment, that game seven, buzzer beater shot, or that end of quarter, $1 million ARR deal, whatever it is that you're striving for, for me, like today, the graduation of my son, I want to ensure that I'm fully present so
Right.
I can enjoy that memory and that success.
And
Um,
savor it and
yeah, yeah,
savor.
yeah, and really, yeah, exactly, because those memories, like you said, they're only in the present. Um, I know we're running up on time. One thing I often always like to ask every guest, Jay, is, if there's one piece of advice you either had for your younger self or for maybe a new client that's on this quest for better understanding themselves, taking what we read about mindfulness and applying it to their lives and really making impact, and that impact not just to be personally but professionally as well. What advice would you offer yourself, or somebody on that journey?
I initially was going to answer this one way, but I'm going to change. I'm going to pivot because this is what I'm feeling right now. I would advise my younger self or any client to start doing what you love now. And the reason is, of course, I initially was thinking about practicing mindfulness and becoming more self-observant. And that's great too. But here's where I'm going, because we had a conversation about that included death and how life is short. And you mentioned your grandmother, and it's been on my mind that there is no certainty beyond this present moment. So if there is no certainty beyond the present moment, what reasoning do we give ourselves to not do what we love? What reasoning, what excuse are we giving to ourselves to say, I'll do this next year, when we really don't know what next year is going to be like, or if we're going to be here? It's practical. And to me, the greatest motivator of all is our mortality. The fact that we don't know. And we know that we're not going to be here forever, but we don't know when that's going to be, should drive us to start now, take steps now to do what you're here to do, whatever that purpose is. If you don't know what that is, take time to find out what that is. Give yourself that time to journal and have that introspection, to learn your mission. And I would say this to my younger self, and I'd say this to anybody who's listening, that there is no promise for tomorrow. Start now and allow yourself to make mistakes, allow all those things to happen, because in the end, I would rather have died knowing I was on the path to getting to my purpose in life than to say I never even had the courage to take the first step.
That's huge. Yeah, to be the best version of ourselves, and thank you for that. Yeah, it reminded me this weekend, I like to feed my energy with cheesy things sometimes that are just positive and motivational for me. So, I'll put on the same video over and over again if it's resonating. So this weekend I'd listened to something that I heard a while ago, and it was talking about, if you are not going to leave a legacy for your great 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 grandchildren in a financial manner, you should leave a legacy that is in a kind of a character manner, where people would say that person always did X, Y, and Z. And I was having this conversation with my wife, because she's trying to figure out that path for herself professionally with the pivot. And I says, well, then today we could focus on being the person that we aim to be,
Yeah.
and it's so important. Jay, where can people find you if they're interested in, absorbing more of your content? Like for me, I loved your videos that you put on LinkedIn. They really are a great way for me to have those checkpoints throughout my day of it's almost like a mindfulness check. If there's a video from Jay, I can save it, and at 2-3 in the afternoon, I could go put on a 3-minute video that's going to be my mindfulness check for myself personally. But where can people reach out to you if they're interested in kind of leadership coaching, sales performance coaching, mindfulness coaching, or just absorb your content?
Yeah, thank you, Ali. I'd say LinkedIn's a great place. I love that platform. I love the community there. It's incredibly positive. So just find me on LinkedIn, Jay Abbasi. You could also go to my website, jayabassi.me, and I have a lot of information there about my content, about the online course that I'm going to be coming out with soon, as well as ways in which you can contact me, schedule time, connect. So those are probably the two best ways to reach me.
Great. Well, Jay, thank you so much for coming on. For those that are tuning in, please like, comment, and share. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Ali. Take care, man.
Likewise.